Hey, what's going on everybody? James here, and we are back with another video in our watch collecting topics series. And we're talking about a big one today, everybody. We are jumping into the topic of what makes a quality luxury watch. Now, for this video, we are going to strip away all the hype. We're going to put aside all of the social media likes and comments and all those things, and we're going to just talk about objective criteria to what makes a quality luxury watch. Now, if this is your first time stopping by the channel, I want to say thanks for coming by. Please do like, comment, and subscribe because I want you to get out of watches whatever you want to get out of watches. And that may be different for you and I, and that's okay because there's plenty of room in this hobby for everybody. And I want you to know and love the watches that you already have so you can be a satisfied collector. So let's jump into this topic. What makes a quality luxury watch? Well, I'm going to propose 4 criteria, and we're going to use some of the examples on the table to talk about those 4 things. So the first thing we got to talk about is the movement. There's no doubt that if you're going to buy a watch for anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to $1,500, all the way up to $40, $50, $60, $70,000, you can run the gamut, but you want a good quality, reliable, and accurate movement. So let's talk about a couple different types. I cannot start this conversation without talking about Grand Seiko because this is a spring drive watch. And spring drive is probably one of the bigger revolutions in watchmaking movements within the last several decades because it basically combines the best of mechanical watchmaking with an element of quartz movements. That's really interesting. So if you don't know what spring drive is, you've never heard of it, definitely take a look to figure out what that means because it's pretty fascinating and it creates that smooth sweep of the seconds hand. So that's an example of an in-house movement that was developed entirely by Grand Seiko, and it's pretty incredible. Then you have modified movements. And what do I mean by modified? Well, back in the day, Jaeger-LeCoultre, that is known as the watchmaker's watchmaker, and there's still some companies out there that do this, they basically make movements for different brands. And then they sell them the movements, and then those brands modify them, adjust them, add a module to them, finish them, whatever it is, and that would be the definition of a modified movement or a modified caliber. Then you have third-party movements, something like this Dan Reuter here. It's using a ETA 7750 chronograph movement. Now, this is not a bad movement by any means, but it's not Dan's, right? He gets these from ETA, and then he hand finishes the heck out of them, because look at that hand finishing on the back of that thing. Now, it doesn't make it bad, because it's still a luxury watch. And within that, there's still an element of accuracy and reliability. And usually when you get into this topic, you start to hear things like COSC, or METAS, or a Master 1000 Hours test. And all those are independent tests that run on, sometimes it's a cased up movement, sometimes it's a movement by itself, and it makes sure that they're in certain tolerances of accuracy and reliability. So I do think that those are important tests and standards to have because it is, again, building a case for being a objectively better, more reliable watch. So second criteria we got to talk about is materials. And we're going to start with Rolex because they talk about their materials a lot. And this one in particular is a stainless bracelet. However, if you've heard their marketing, you know that it's not just regular stainless. You know, I had a Fossil watch when I was younger, and that thing was just brushed stainless steel. Very, very cheap to make, and nothing really special about it. This, however, is 904L stainless steel. And what does that mean? It means that it's much more corrosion resistant than you would find on a regular stainless steel watch. Now, why does that matter? Because again, that does contribute to the corrosion resistance of the watch. I don't have to worry about washing it after I take it off my wrist or after I get out of the pool, and that can be a really big benefit. So that's an example of kind of an enhanced type of stainless steel. Then you get into something like precious metals, right? So if you get into like this Jaeger-LeCoultre, it's a Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Enamel, and it is white gold, which is also gray gold. So some companies like JLC, like Rolex, like Patek, they have their own foundries, and they actually make their own precious metals, because then you don't have to worry about rhodium plating something that's white gold, for instance. There's just gray metal all the way through. So if you scratch it, there's just more gray underneath, and you don't have to worry about discoloration. And then there are other odd materials. Odd, I say that in terms of not as common. But for instance, Grand Seiko does make quite a few titanium watches. They call it high intensity titanium. And there's grade 5 and there's grade 3 and there's a whole bunch of other types of metal. So that's where it does get interesting. But I do think, again, that contributes to being a higher quality luxury watch is the material. What is that actually made out of? Then you get into the third criteria, which is construction and finishing. So again, I'll go back to Rolex. If you've ever held a Rolex watch in your hands, you know what I mean when I say high quality construction. It feels solid. And that is something that not every brand can achieve, despite many that try. So you talk about build quality. Another aspect of that is adjustability, right? You have the Easy Link system on Rolex that allows you to add or remove, essentially, a little link to adjust it on the fly. And that's important objectively, because some watches, like Grand Seiko, for instance, until just recently, now that they have a micro adjust on some of their newer pieces, they didn't have that. And so that made it harder to adjust on the fly. That can be important. Water resistance is important, because if you're going to have a watch that is a GADA, or a go anywhere, do anything watch, you want to have some water resistance built into it. Again, it's one of the reasons I like my Reuter. Even though it's not a screw down crown technically, it still has 50 meters of water resistance. And I've talked to Dan about these watches, and they pretty much are go anywhere, do anything watches. You can swim with them, whatever it is, take them in the shower. I don't really shower with my watches, but they have a lot of that versatility there, and that's really important. Then as far as the finishing goes, you can find this on either side of the dial. Right? This is a great example of hand finishing on the dial side. But on the back, a little bit more on the mechanical side, despite the fact that there are some hand finishing touches here. So there's a little bit of both. But you've got to ask yourself that question, right? One is, how important are those things to you? But again, objectively speaking, you can say, okay, it's either mechanically done or it's hand finished, right? Those are important. And then the fourth criteria for luxury watches, I would say serviceability is a really important one, because you've got to ask yourself, is the company going to be around to service my watch? Or is it something that has a common movement in it that I could go to a watchmaker and they would be able to service for me without any sort of issue? I do think that's a really important consideration. And again, very objective when we're talking about luxury watches. So those are my 4 criteria that are very objective: the movement, the materials, the construction and finishing, and the serviceability. Those are really, really important. Lastly, I do want to touch on the more personal aspects of luxury watches, and I do think these are very personal. They're not objective, right? So for me, the aesthetics is really important. This Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion has an absolutely beautiful and stunning aventurine dial. Some people don't really care about this sort of dial. They say that looks busy, it's not exciting, whatever. It's like maybe the legibility, whatever, right? Different critiques of it. That is a very personal aspect of luxury watches, right? The design. I think it's important. It's important to me, but it's less around the objective side of things. Aesthetics, design, and then function, I think, is another big piece of that, right? So like, I love using my Sky Dweller for travel. It's designed for travel. It's a annual calendar with a GMT function. Makes it great for traveling. You may not need that or care about that. You may be more interested in being able to time something with a chronograph, and that's okay. Again, these are more of the personal aspects of watches. This is where, again, it's not necessarily going to make it objectively a higher quality watch, but it will be more important to you as the owner. Again, aesthetic here, probably one of my top dials of all time on this JLC, and that's a big reason why I own this watch. You may not like the fact that there are multiple styles of guilloche. Maybe a perpetual calendar and a moon phase is too busy for you, and I get that. So that's where, again, this is more of a personal choice than saying, hey, that's going to make it a higher quality watch. So those are my takes on what makes something a quality luxury watch, as well as touching on some of those personal aspects of luxury watches. So I hope that you found something interesting, and I want to appreciate you for stopping by. So again, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope that you get out of watches whatever it is that you want to get out of watches, because I want you to know and love the watches you have so that you can be a satisfied collector. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.